The chandeliered ballroom wasn't quiet. It cracked open with a laugh sharp enough to slice crystal. A woman in navy silk, hair sculpted like armor, pointed her manicured finger across the room. "Hey, Blackie, go serve!" Her voice didn't whisper. It soared, cutting through violins, bouncing off marble. The crowd rippled. Champagne glasses froze midair. A ring of tuxedos and gowns turned, curiosity sharpening into ridicule. The young woman they mocked didn't move. She stood at the edge of the crowd in a soft, blush-pink dress, a phone pressed to her ear. Her expression, quiet, carved, unyielding, looked nothing like the servant they thought she was. But that didn't matter. To them, her skin was a uniform. Laughter swelled behind the navy silk matriarch. Her husband smirked, teeth white against the ballroom lights. Their son added, "Don't stand there, sweetheart. Tables don't clear themselves." Even the waiters looked away, shame thick in the air. The young woman, Ariana Cole, shifted slightly, her hand steady on the phone. No flinch, no retort, just stillness. As if she'd been here before. As if these words weren't daggers but echoes. A junior waiter near the champagne tower whispered to himself, "That's not right." His fingers hovered over his pocket, instinct tugging toward the record button. But the woman on the phone raised her gaze, locking him in place without speaking. Calm radiated from her like an iron wall. The ballroom murmured now, curiosity blooming into arrogance. A guest in sequins whispered, "She doesn't belong here." Another scoffed, "Look at that dress off the rack." Words stacked on words, an avalanche of dismissal. Yet Ariana's silence was deliberate. It wasn't surrender, it was rope. Every insult they hurled, she let coil around their own necks. And just before the laughter peaked, her voice slipped through the phone, low, controlled, final. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Ariana. The matriarch's fingers still jabbed, triumphant. But Ariana's eyes narrowed, almost imperceptible. Her phone stayed at her ear, her spine straight as a verdict. She wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Because this wasn't just a party, it was the battlefield. And the first shot had already been fired. The chandeliers kept burning above, gold fire frozen in crystal. But for Ariana Cole, the ballroom was colder than a courtroom. She hadn't chosen this room for its beauty. She chose it for its test. Tonight was supposed to be nothing more than a signature $900 million exchanged, a merger sealed. No press, no cameras, just polished deals dressed as a gala. And yet, the disguise worked both ways. She came alone. No entourage, no designer jewels. Just a blush pink dress, clean lines, no brand stitched loud enough to speak for her. To anyone else, she looked like another guest. Maybe a date. Maybe, as the family had sneered, a server who wandered too close to the champagne tower. That was deliberate. She wanted to see the truth before she showed her name. At 39, Ariana had signed contracts that rewrote industries. But this night was personal. The Langford family, old money, white money, loud money, had chased the deal for years. Their empire wanted hers. Tonight, they would have shaken hands under chandeliers and smiled for history. But history doesn't smile the same on everyone. The matriarch, still laughing, leaned back into her circle of friends, pearls trembling at her throat. The patriarch gripped a glass of bourbon like it was evidence. Their son, tuxedo tight across his shoulders, wore a smirk carved from entitlement. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a trespasser. And in their eyes, that was enough. Ariana's stillness wasn't weakness. It was armor. The phone in her hand wasn't a shield. It was command. On the other end, a voice waited her assistant, her witness, her ally. But not yet. Not until they showed their full hand. She remembered another room. Not chandeliers, but fluorescent lights. Not marble, but scuffed tile. 22 years old. First commercial lease negotiation. The broker had looked her up and down and said, "Sweetheart, this space is out of your league." She'd walked out. That night, she drafted her first acquisition plan on a diner napkin. The napkin became a portfolio. The portfolio became an empire. And tonight, that empire stood quietly in a pink dress, watching arrogance repeat itself under brighter lights. Around the ballroom, guests shifted, some uncomfortable, some entertained. A few whispered like theater critics waiting for the next act. But the next act wouldn't be hers, it would be theirs. Because Ariana knew silence stretches, It reveals. Every second she didn't answer, their prejudice grew louder, sharper, undeniable. And when the room was drowning in it, then only then would she let her voice break the surface. The laughter didn't end. It sharpened. The son leaned forward, tuxedo collar open just enough to show off ease born of money. "You know," he said, voice sliding across the table like spilled wine, "it's cute when the help pretends to be a guest. But this table, this deal isn't cosplay. It's legacy, and you don't have it." The words weren't just insult. They were declaration. The Langfords weren't hiding their bias anymore. They were building it into spectacle. Ariana Cole stayed silent. Her phone rested against her cheek, a faint glow on the screen. The room tilted toward her stillness like moths toward flame. They wanted a reaction. She gave them none. The patriarch chuckled low, as if his son's cruelty deserved applause. "Every generation," he said, lifting his bourbon, "we see this. Someone eager, someone dressed well enough to slip past the doors. And then," he snapped his fingers, "gone. No memory, no legacy. Just another ghost in a rented gown." Across the room, a violinist paused mid-stroke. The note died unfinished, swallowed by silence. Guests leaned in, attention tethered now to the table where arrogance sat like centerpiece. The matriarch adjusted her pearls, eyes sweeping Ariana top to bottom with surgical disdain. "Who invited her here?" she demanded. "This is a private table, private money, private heritage. Remove her." "Ugh." Two security men in black suits shifted near the entrance, hesitant but ready. Their eyes flicked between the Langfords and the woman in pink. She didn't flinch, didn't step back. Her chair remained anchored as if bolted to marble. The son smirked wider. "She won't move. They never do. Too desperate for a seat that isn't theirs." He leaned closer, dropping his voice but not enough to hide it. "Tell me, how'd you sneak in? Friend of a caterer? Or are you just hoping someone mistakes you for a +1? Murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Not laughter now, something darker. Some guests smiled nervously, unsure whether to join in or recoil. Others whispered, phones tilted just slightly, cameras waking in secret. The junior waiter near the champagne tower felt his pulse quicken. His thumb hovered over record again. He caught Ariana's eye. She blinked once calm, precise. A signal, not yet. The insults kept coming, each one heavier than the last. "You look out of place. You don't belong in this room. Tables like this are earned, sweetheart, not stumbled into." Every word stacked like bricks around Ariana's silence. And still, she didn't break. She let them build their own wall, higher, louder, unstable. Because she knew what they didn't, walls this crooked collapse on their builders. The insults landed like stones on water, loud at impact but fading into ripples. Ariana Cole didn't reach for them. She let them sink. Her hand stayed steady on the phone. No tremor, no grip too tight. To anyone watching, she might have been waiting for a call to connect. But her silence was the sharpest sound in the ballroom. The patriarch raised his glass again, bourbon swirling like liquid arrogance. "See? No answer. That's what silence means, ladies and gentlemen. No claim, no seat." But Ariana's silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Every second she withheld words, the Langfords dug deeper, exposing themselves. Their voices grew harsher, less polished, stripped of the elegance they pretended to own. The son leaned across the table, his cufflinks catching chandelier light. "Not even going to defend yourself? Maybe you know we're right. Maybe you've already accepted what this room sees you don't belong." She didn't look at him, didn't gift him her eyes. Instead, she lowered her gaze to the notes she had written hours earlier, her pen strokes neat, angled, deliberate. She circled a line once, calmly, as if annotating a lecture. Guests shifted uncomfortably now, her stillness unsettled more than any raised voice could. A woman in sequins whispered to her partner, "Why isn't she leaving?" He muttered back, "Why isn't security moving?" "Because power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits." The matriarch snapped her fingers toward the guards. "Remove her." Her pearls rattled with the force of her demand. But even the guards hesitated. Something in Ariana's composure made hesitation bloom like doubt. The junior waiter, breath shallow, finally slid his phone halfway from his pocket. He wasn't recording yet, but his finger rested on the screen, trembling. His eyes darted between Ariana and the family. He wanted proof. Proof that the weight of this silence wasn't just in his imagination. Ariana exhaled once, slow, steady, as if grounding herself in marble, in crystal, in memory. Because she remembered. She remembered the office in Atlanta when she was 25, sitting across from men in suits who spoke over her, around her, as though her voice didn't exist. She remembered a bank lobby at 30, when a manager told her she needed real verification before she could withdraw her own funds. Every room, every insult, every moment of being erased, it lived inside her, not as scars, but as strategy. So now, in this ballroom, she did what those years had taught her. She gave them rope. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was a mirror. And soon, they would see themselves in it and recoil. The ballroom didn't breathe. It watched. Ariana Cole's silence stretched, taut as a violin string. The Langfords mistook it for weakness, but others in the room felt something different, an unease, a charge. Near the champagne tower, the junior waiter couldn't take it anymore. His thumb pressed down. The red circle of record lit up, small but defiant, glowing against silver trays and crystal flutes. He angled his phone low, camera tucked just beneath the linen of his apron. The screen captured faces twisted in arrogance, voices sharp enough to wound. Every insult became data. Every laugh became evidence. Beside him, another server whispered, "Turn it off. You'll lose your job." He shook his head. Some jobs aren't worth silence. At the far side of the ballroom, two guests at a smaller table leaned toward each other. A woman in emerald silk hissed, "Are you hearing this?" Her partner, a man in his 60s, whispered back, "I've lived this. Too many times." He raised his phone too, not hidden, not quiet, bold. The ripple spread. One by one, lenses lifted, some discreet, some daring. The room was no longer just marble and music. It was a stage, an archive. The matriarch noticed first. "What are you doing?" she snapped at the man in Emerald's company. "This is private." But the waiter stepped forward, voice trembling yet clear. "Private doesn't sound like this. Private doesn't humiliate." The son scoffed. "Stay out of this. Your staff." But the word staff no longer landed as power. It landed as proof of what the room had just witnessed. Hierarchy, wielded like a weapon. Ariana remained still, eyes steady, hands calm. She hadn't asked for defense. She hadn't called for allies. Yet silence had drawn them. The patriarch slammed his bourbon down, liquid splashing onto white linen. "Enough," he barked. "Phones away. This is our table, our deal." But deals don't survive exposure. Not when witnesses multiply. The waiter's voice cracked, but he didn't lower his phone. "If this is your deal, why does it look like bullying?" The ballroom shifted again. Guests who had laughed minutes earlier now frowned. Others turned away, uneasy with their own complicity. The chandelier light no longer shimmered like celebration. It glared like interrogation. Ariana inhaled, her first deep breath in minutes. Still calm, still anchored. Her silence had worked. The room was no longer hers alone to carry. Because justice doesn't always roar from the center. Sometimes, it rises quietly from the edges, recorded on shaky hands, whispered by those who've had enough. The Langfords could feel the room turning, but arrogance doesn't retreat, it doubles down. The matriarch's pearls rattled as she stood. "Put those phones away!" Her voice cracked sharp against the chandeliers. She jabbed a finger at Ariana, still seated, still silent. "This imposter doesn't belong here. She's nothing but a fraud looking for attention." The patriarch followed, his bourbon glass abandoned, voice booming. "Security!" The word rolled across the ballroom like a gavel. Two men in black suits began moving closer, their steps deliberate, heavy, practiced. The son smirked wider, emboldened. "See? Even now she won't speak. Guilty people never do." He leaned toward Ariana, sneering. "You thought you could trick us? Sit at our table? $900 million doesn't cross hands with charity cases." Murmurs swelled. Some guests recoiled, shaking their heads. Others, emboldened by power's shadow, chuckled nervously. A woman in sequins muttered, "Maybe they're right. She hasn't said a word." Her friend whispered back, "Or maybe she doesn't need to." The junior waiter, phone still recording, stepped forward one pace. His voice trembled but rose anyway. "She hasn't said anything because she doesn't have to. You're showing the world who you are." The son snapped, "Stay in your lane, boy, or you'll be gone by midnight." A hush followed. The words landed wrong, sharp and ugly. Guests shifted uncomfortably. The ballroom didn't feel like celebration anymore, it felt like trial. The matriarch seized the moment, pointing again at Ariana. "Remove her now," she barked at security. "This is our deal, our table, our legacy, and she is contaminating it." The guards approached, their black suits cutting through silk and sequins like shadows. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Authority had summoned them, and in rooms like this, authority usually wins. But Ariana didn't move. Her phone remained at her ear, her posture anchored. She looked not at the guards, not at the family, but at the reflection in the crystal glass before her, calm, unbroken, waiting, because she had seen this before. At 28, in a boardroom lined with men twice her age, security had been called when she challenged a false audit. They escorted her out until the paperwork she'd left behind exposed their fraud. That day, silence turned into strategy. Tonight would be no different. The patriarch slammed his fist on the table, rattling silverware. "She is wasting our time. She is an intruder." But the room was no longer certain. Guests whispered, shifting, phones still raised. Some filmed openly now. Others watched with narrowed eyes, the weight of truth dawning. And Ariana, still silent, let it all unfold. Because every insult, every order, every step of those guards was fuel. And when she finally spoke, the fire would consume more than just arrogance. It would consume the entire deal. The ballroom trembled with tension, not music. The matriarch's face twisted, fury stretching her polished features. With one swift motion, she grabbed the stack of contract papers from the velvet folder. Her bracelets clinked as she hurled them across the table. The pages fanned out midair like white knives, scattering at Ariana's feet. "There," she spat. "That's the closest you'll ever come to a $900 million deal. Pick it up if you want a souvenir." Gasps tore through the crowd. Some clutched pearls, others froze mid-sip, champagne trembling in crystal stems. What had been whispers of arrogance was now violence of dignity. The patriarch piled on, his voice deep, gravel thick with scorn. "Do you hear me? You are not welcome here. Not at this table. Not in this deal. Security, remove her. She is done." One of the guards stepped closer, reaching toward Ariana's chair. But Ariana didn't flinch. Her phone still rested against her ear, her hand still poised, calm, unshaken. The son laughed loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. He picked up a linen napkin, snapped it in the air, and let it fall onto the scattered papers. "A janitor's touch for janitor's dreams," he sneered. "Be grateful we let you stand this close." Ugh. The junior waiter couldn't stay silent. His voice broke, high with outrage. "Stop! You can't!" But before he could finish, the patriarch turned, barked, "Quiet!" The word hit like a slap. The waiter froze, eyes wide, recording still blinking red. Guests were split. Some shook their heads, disbelief written on their faces. Others shrank back, unwilling to intervene. Yet every insult, every act of cruelty etched itself deeper into the phones that filmed from corners, from tables, from trembling hands. Ariana lowered her eyes to the papers at her feet. For a moment, the room thought she might bend, stoop, gather the documents like debris, but she didn't move. Instead, she lifted her chin, slow, precise, regal. Her silence was heavier than their rage. And in that silence, the ballroom itself shifted. The laughter that had filled its chandeliers minutes earlier sounded brittle now, like glass on the edge of shatter. Because Ariana's calm wasn't absence, it was pressure. And everyone, guards, guests, even the Langfords, could feel it tightening. The matriarch's voice cracked, shrill in her own echo. "Do you understand? You will never sign these papers. Never." Her words clanged against marble like chains, desperate, frantic, already slipping out of control. And Ariana still hadn't spoken a single word. Not yet. The ballroom held its breath. Papers still littered the marble floor like fallen feathers. A mockery turned into evidence. The Langfords smirked, believing they'd buried her. But Ariana Cole finally moved. Not to stoop, not to gather. She raised the phone from her ear just enough for her voice to carry, calm but sharp as cut glass. "Proceed." On the other end, a woman's voice answered instantly, efficient, composed, protocol active, all documents uploaded to the legal board, timestamps logged, bias language captured. The words cut through the air louder than any violin. Guests froze. The junior waiter's recording caught every syllable. The patriarch barked. What did she just say? But Ariana's gaze never wavered. She tapped the screen once, placing the phone flat on the table, speaker open for all to hear. Her assistant's voice echoed into the ballroom. Cross, referencing signatures, confirming Langford compliance history. 3 prior investigations flagged for discriminatory practices. Shall I broadcast to attending shareholders? Gasps burst around the room. The matriarch's smirk faltered. The son shifted in his chair, suddenly less sure of his sneer. Ariana remained still, her posture steady, unyielding. The calm she had worn like armor now gleamed like a blade. The patriarch roared, "You have no authority here!" But even as he shouted, whispers rose from the crowd. Guests leaned to one another, eyes wide, voices low. Did she say protocol? She's not staff. She's in control. She's someone bigger. The guards paused, steps heavy but uncertain. Authority was no longer clear. Power was no longer simple. The junior waiter stepped forward again, courage building in his chest. He spoke loud enough for the room to hear. "She's not here to sneak in, she's here to watch, and you're showing her everything." The matriarch slammed a hand on the table. "Enough of this circus!" But her tone lacked steel now. It cracked like porcelain under strain. Ariana lifted her hand, silencing even the murmurs. Her eyes scanned the family one by one, calm, cold, deliberate. "You've said enough," she whispered. And the weight of those words pressed heavier than any shout, because in that instant, the balance shifted. The room that once laughed with the Langfords now leaned toward Ariana. Not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't need to. The deal no longer sat on the table in papers. It sat in her silence, her protocol, her command. And for the first time that night, the Langfords looked uneasy. The ballroom's pulse slowed. You could hear the chandeliers hum, the faint hiss of champagne losing its bubbles, the silence of 100 throats waiting. Ariana Cole rose, not quickly, not in anger. She rose the way a verdict is read, slow, final, unshakable. Her blush-pink dress caught the light, no longer soft, but sharp, like steel wrapped in silk. She looked at the papers scattered at her feet. She let them stay there. Then she lifted her gaze and spoke, her voice carrying without effort. "You want to know who I am?" The matriarch scoffed, desperate to snatch back control. "We already do. You're no one." Ariana tilted her head. Calm, patient, lethal. "Number you only think you do." The junior waiter's phone trembled in his hand, recording every syllable. Guests leaned forward. Even the guards stilled. "I am not a guest who wandered into your ballroom," Ariana continued. "I am not a charity case waiting for crumbs, and I am not here to beg a seat at your table." The patriarch opened his mouth, but she cut through him with steel-lined calm. "I am the table." Gasps broke, uncontained. Phones lifted higher. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, Ariana pressed her palm flat against the velvet folder that had once held the contracts. Her words landed like hammers. "I am Ariana Cole, CEO of Cole Global Holdings, architect of this merger, the one who holds final authority over whether $900 million crosses this room." The son's smirk collapsed. His jaw tightened, but no words came out. The matriarch staggered back a step, pearls trembling at her throat. "You're lying," she whispered, but the whisper sounded more like fear than power. Her assistant's voice rang from the phone, still on speaker. Identity verified. Ariana Cole, sole executive signatory of the Cole-Langford acquisition deal. The confirmation was a gavel strike. Final, irrefutable. The room erupted not with applause, not yet, but with the buzz of realization. Guests whispered names, headlines, Forbes covers they'd seen months before but never connected to the woman in pink. The murmurs swelled into a tide of recognition. The patriarch's face drained of color. He stared at Ariana as though the ground beneath him had shifted, because it had. And Ariana stood tall, the silence finally broken not by their insults, but by her truth. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Ariana Cole, CEO, 900 million under her hand. For a moment, the ballroom was silent. Not elegant silence, stunned silence, brittle and sharp. Then the murmurs crashed in. "She's the CEO. I saw her on Forbes." "Wait, that's her? In this dress?" Phones lifted higher now, no longer secret. Guests craned their necks, catching angles, whispering names. The chandeliers above gleamed harsher, spotlighting truth the Langfords could no longer hide. The matriarch's hand trembled around her pearls. She tried to steady her voice, but it cracked anyway. "Number? No, this is..." The junior waiter stepped forward, his phone still recording, courage overtaking fear. His voice sliced through the chaos. She's telling the truth. I heard the system verify it. She's the CEO. Gasps rippled again. A woman in sequins covered her mouth. A man in a gray tux whispered, "Oh my God!" We laughed at her. Another hissed back. And we filmed it. The patriarch's bourbon glass toppled as his hand slipped. Amber liquid spread across linen, a stain spreading like their power unraveling. He grabbed the table edge, knuckles white. "This changes nothing," he rasped, but his voice betrayed him. It was thinner now. The son looked around, seeking allies, but the smirks had vanished. The crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were looking at him, judging, recording. Even the guards froze mid-step. Their orders to remove Ariana evaporated into doubt. Which carried more weight, a matriarch's demand, or the reality of a CEO with signatures in her hands? The ballroom, once their stage, had turned tribunal, and the Langfords were no longer judges. They were defendants. The junior waiter's voice rose again, stronger now. "You mocked her. You threw her contract. You said she didn't belong. But this is her deal." Guests nodded, murmuring agreement. Phones captured his words, amplifying them into evidence. The matriarch's face drained of color. She reached for her husband, whispering, "Do something." But he had nothing left to do, because Ariana had revealed what silence had concealed. Power. Real, undeniable, irrevocable power. And in that moment, the Langfords weren't laughing at a stranger. They were standing in the wreckage of their own arrogance, watching it live-streamed to the world. The ballroom held its collective breath, every eye fixed on Ariana Cole. She stood over the scattered papers, her posture unshaken, her voice low but sharp enough to cut marble. "This deal," she said, "ends now." The words didn't echo. They detonated. Gasps rippled through sequins and silk. Phones shook in hands as guests tried to steady their footage. A whisper rolled across the room like fire through dry grass. She canceled it. "$900 million. Gone." Ugh. The matriarch staggered back into her chair, pearls slipping against her collarbone like beads of panic. You can't do that," she stammered. "This is our table, our contract." Ariana's gaze didn't waver. "Contracts are signatures, not insults, and mine is final." The patriarch slammed his palm against the table, bourbon splashing again. "This is theft," his voice boomed, but it trembled, a desperate echo of power already lost. "No," Ariana replied, calm, decisive. "This is consequence." The son leaned forward, his smirk long gone, desperation clawing at his tone. "Wait, we can renegotiate. We'll apologize." His words fell clumsy, hollow, too late. Ariana's phone glowed where it lay on the velvet folder. Her assistant's voice came through clear, clinical. "Confirmation. Cole Global Holdings has withdrawn from the Langford merger. Notification sent to shareholders. Press embargo lifted." The crowd erupted not with applause, but with disbelief, awe, exhilaration. "This is history." She walked in quiet and just killed a $900 million deal. They mocked her, and she ended it. The junior waiter, still recording, spoke again. His voice didn't tremble this time. "You said she didn't belong, but she was the only one who did." Phones captured every angle, the matriarch's pale face, the patriarch's shaking hand, the son's wide eyes. No power left to command the room. No allies left to drown out the truth. Ariana bent only once, not to pick up the scattered pages, but to slide the velvet folder shut, smooth and final. She left the papers where they had fallen, a monument to arrogance. She turned her gaze across the room, meeting the eyes of guests, servers, guards. Her words were steady, each syllable anchored. "You thought silence meant weakness. You thought humility meant absence. You mistook respect for submission. That was your last mistake." Ugh! The chandeliers above didn't sparkle anymore. They glared, unflinching, exposing everything. The patriarch collapsed back into his chair, whispering to no one. $900 million. The words were brittle, empty. The son rubbed his forehead like he could erase the cameras pointed at him. The matriarch gripped her pearls until her knuckles whitened, but no prayer could save her. The ballroom, once their theater, had become their courtroom, and Ariana Cole had delivered the sentence without raising her voice. The ballroom was no longer a ballroom. It was a courtroom, a theater, a broadcast. And in its center, Ariana Cole stood not as an intruder, not as a guest, but as the axis of everything. The chandeliers above seemed harsher now, not glowing but glaring, as if the very light had turned into witness. Phones hovered in the air like silent jurors, each one capturing truth in high definition. And the Langfords, who minutes earlier had commanded the room, now sat pale and trembling in their own wreckage. The matriarch clutched her pearls, her voice breaking into a whisper that only the closest guests could hear. She ended it. 900 million. Gone. The patriarch's shoulders sagged, the weight of lost empire pressing him into the velvet of his chair. His bourbon glass lay toppled, amber bleeding across linen, a stain that would never wash out. The son stared at Ariana like he had just seen a ghost, except ghosts don't end fortunes. Ghosts don't cancel dynasties. But she did. Ariana didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She stood calm, still, commanding. Her presence filled the space not with noise, but with gravity. She lifted her phone again, tapped once, and her assistant's voice carried across the room. Merger terminated. Statement drafted. Media will run the announcement within the hour. The words landed like hammer strikes. Final. Irreversible. Gasps swelled, followed by murmurs, followed by the sharp buzz of notifications as phones around the room began to vibrate. Guests glanced down, eyes widening. She wasn't bluffing. It's already on Bloomberg. Breaking news. The Langfords turned as one toward Ariana, disbelief and terror etched into every line of their faces. They had mocked her, dismissed her, humiliated her. And she had answered not with shouting, not with tears, but with a signature's silence. Ariana stepped around the scattered papers at her feet, her heels clicking against marble like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of the Langfords' illusion. She paused beside the junior waiter, the boy whose trembling hands had held steady when the room wanted him silent. She looked at him once, a glance heavy with acknowledgement. He swallowed hard, nodded, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "You did the right thing," she said softly, only for him to hear. And in that moment, his eyes filled with something stronger than fear. Pride. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising not loud, but resonant. "You called me an intruder in a deal that was mine to sign. You called me a fraud in a room I paid to build. You laughed at a woman in pink because you mistook silence for absence. But silence is not absence. Silence is calculation." The words cut deeper than any shout. Guests straightened in their chairs. Servers froze mid-step. Even the chandeliers seemed to still. Ariana's gaze locked on the Langfords. "You thought you owned this room, but you only rented it with arrogance. And arrogance doesn't pay its bills." The patriarch's lips parted, but no words came out. The matriarch shook her head in tiny, frantic motions, as if denial could stitch reality back together. The son finally muttered, "You can't just walk away." Ariana stepped closer, her presence swallowing their protests. "I already did." Ugh. The silence that followed was suffocating. It pressed against silk, sequins, tuxedo collars. It pressed against cameras recording every angle, every word. Then, slowly, applause began. Not thunderous at first, but cautious, one pair of hands, then another. A guest in emerald silk clapped, her partner joining, then a wave of hands striking together in the heavy air. Applause, yes, but also vindication. Not for entertainment, but for justice. The Langfords looked around, bewildered, realizing the applause wasn't theirs. It wasn't admiration for old money, old power. It was for the woman they had mocked. Ariana let the applause swell, then raised her hand. It stopped on command, like a conductor silencing an orchestra. She spoke once more, her final words calibrated, razor sharp. "I don't need to scream for justice. I don't need to beg for dignity. I am the result of every room that told me I didn't belong. I am the answer to every insult, every doubt, every silence. And tonight, I proved it in yours." Her words hung heavy, settling into every corner of the ballroom, into every phone, every recording. Then she turned, walking toward the exit. Each step echoed, deliberate, anchored. No security touched her. No voice dared to stop her. The ballroom parted, as if commanded by something greater than fear, respect. At the doorway, she paused only once. She didn't look back at the Langfords. She looked forward, her voice carrying like the last line of a verdict. "You thought you buried me under silence, but silence is where I build empires." And then she walked out, leaving behind chandeliers, cameras, and a family whose empire had crumbled in the span of one quiet evening. The junior waiter lowered his phone, tears stinging his eyes. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. She didn't raise her voice once. Ugh. The ballroom whispered back, hundreds of voices overlapping, awe mixing with shame. She didn't have to.